Okay, now let us continue going through part B of the essay question. The last time I stopped, we were talking about the 4 basic steps that you should have while going through the different policies. So right now, I will go on to discuss the other 3 policies, and I want you to take note of how I go through each of these 4 steps. Okay? So let us see. So now I want to talk about monetary policy. Again, the first step, I explain what is monetary policy and expansionary monetary policy. So monetary policy essentially is to use the money supply to manage aggregate demand. And what I need to do for expansionary monetary policy in order to stimulate my economy is to increase money supply to decrease interest rates. Okay. Now, the second step, I explain how monetary policy is conducted. So, I will explain the Keynesian transmission mechanism process. And this actually starts by the central bank conducting open market operations. Okay, this is a common step that most students tend to forget. For completeness sake, I would actually be very happy if you can include it in your essays. Okay, so for expansionary monetary policy, the central bank is buying back bonds from the commercial banks, and money supply increases when the central bank pay the commercial banks with cash. Okay, so because of the increase in money supply, interest rates will fall. Okay, this is your first Keynesian transmission mechanism diagram. And as interest rates fall, the cost of borrowing falls, which means that investments become more profitable and investment increase. This is your second Keynesian transmission diagram. Okay, and finally, when there is a increase in investments, it leads to an increase in AD. This is actually your third KTM diagram, but notice here that it is actually the same as figure 1. So you don't need to redraw the diagram, refer the marker back to figure 1. Okay. Now, how monetary policy leads to economic growth essentially is the same as how fiscal policy leads to economic growth, because ultimately both of them are demand side policies, and what has happened is that your demand curve shifts to the right. Okay, so the explanation here is the same as the previous explanation of how fiscal policy leads to economic growth, so don't need to write the same thing again, so just make references back to the previous explanation. Okay. Finally, the last step, you explain when is monetary policy not effective. Okay, so this is your evaluation of monetary policy. And again, there are some of the more common ones that you have always used, like interest inelasticity of investments, openness to capital flows. What I want to spend a little bit more time is here on the openness of foreign capital flows. Now, if you look at the Keynesian transmission mechanism, the key thing of expansionary monetary policy is that interest rates must fall. Okay. However, when interest rates fall, foreign capital actually flow out of Singapore in search of countries with higher interest rates. You always want to deposit your money at a place where it pays higher interest rates. It is the same for countries. If Singapore's interest rate fall, these foreign capital, in this case capital refers to money, so foreign capital would be removed from Singapore and it will go to other countries with higher interest rates. Essentially, that means that the money supply in Singapore will decrease, and because the money supply will decrease, as per your first diagram in the Keynesian transmission mechanism, interest rates will rise back. Okay, interest rates will increase, which essentially what I'm trying to say here is that the capital outflow due to the lower interest rates actually negates the effect of expansionary monetary policy. So because of this negating effect, monetary policy is not going to be effective. Okay. So now I move on to supply side policies. Like I said at the start, preferably give me two. One, a short run supply side policy, and the other one, a long run supply side policy. Okay. In your answer, you should make clear whether the supply side policy that you are mentioning is a short run or a long run supply side policy. Okay. Again, the 4 steps are still there. You can see it on the slide. Basically, short run supply side policy aims to reduce cost of production so as to increase the SRAS, which means that graphically you should see a downward shift of the horizontal part of AS. Okay, so what I've done here again is to explain what is short run supply side policy. So how is it conducted? For example, in 2008, there was this initiative known as the Jobs Credit Scheme, whereby the Singapore government actually subsidized part of the wages of each employee. Okay, so basically what happens is that the wage cost to the firms actually fell. Very simple, the government essentially pays part of the wages. So the wage cost to the firms fell. And that means that the cost of production for the firms will also decrease. Okay. Another example would be the influx of foreign labor. And by allowing the inflow of foreign labor, it would allow firms to save on wages. Because ultimately, remember, the foreign workers, they are willing to work for a lower wage. So by allowing them to come into Singapore, firms are actually able to save on wages. So again, cost of production decrease. Okay, but one thing to note is that this influx of foreign labor can also be a long run supply side policy, depending on how you explain it. I'll go through that later in the upcoming slides. So again, I expect you to show me a diagram. Here you see a downward shift of the horizontal part of AS, and what you see here is that there is an increase in real national income, and therefore I have actual growth. But the explanation is that when there is a decrease in cost of production, firms would make more profits. So the firms would produce more, and when they produce more, there will be an increase in real national income. So again, rather than just reading off the diagram, please give me this explanation. Okay, this part here in blue. Okay. So when would it not be effective? Very simple. You are expected to do some evaluation of the examples that you have brought up. Okay, I cannot stress this enough. If you talk about jobs credit scheme in the front part, in your evaluation, you must also evaluate the jobs credit scheme. Don't go and evaluate something else. Okay, so the key thing about jobs credit scheme is that it would cause firms to be over reliant on wage subsidies by the government, which means even though some firms may be unproductive, they can continue to operate because of these wage subsidies. Okay, that makes your economy inefficient, and that's not something that we want. Okay, foreign labor, the usual ones that you are familiar with: social strains, instability due to over dependence on foreign labor. Okay, once you have finished short run supply side policies, we can then move on to long run supply side policies. And what are long run supply side policies? Basically, it aims to increase productive capacity of the economy and to shift the vertical part of AS curve rightwards. Okay, how can this be conducted? Very simple, increase in foreign labor. So I've talked about this before, but the key link that you should make, instead of relating to cost of production, you should now link it to the fact that there will be an increase in the quantity of labor in your economy. Okay, which means that there will be an increase in productive capacity. Right? Another way to conduct long-run supply side policy is to focus on the quality of labor. A policy that focuses on the quality of labor would be the development of new technology through R&D, research and development. Okay, so what can the government do basically is to subsidize increased research in developing new technologies. These technologies, they allow our labor workforce to produce more with the same amount of resources. Therefore, there will be an increase in productive capacity. Okay. Okay, diagram. This is a rightward shift of the vertical part of AS. So what we see here is actually potential growth. Now, but the key thing here is this. Now, this is the interesting part of long-run supply-side policies. Not only does it result in potential growth, it also results in increase in real national income, which means actual growth. Okay, so when there is an increase in productive capacity, again, firms make more profits. Now, notice it is always related to profits. Okay, firms make more profits, they are willing to produce more to maximize their profits. Therefore, there is an increase in real national income and actual growth. Okay, so I say again, I stress one more time that long-run supply-side policies, the key thing is that it is able to deliver both potential growth and actual growth. This is something that cannot be done by demand-side policies and short-run supply-side policies. Okay. So how do you evaluate? Again, it must be relevant to the examples that you have used. We have talked about inflow of foreign labor. Now, how about developing technology? The evaluation that you should talk about here is that it is never certain when it comes to research. Okay, there is no guarantee that your research would result in useful technology. Even if it does result in useful technology, it may take a very long time to see the results. Okay, so now finally we are at the conclusion. What policies should the government adopt? This is the question that you need to answer, and this is the stand. Okay, you have presented both sides, you have come to the stand. This is the question that you have to answer. Basically, almost standard one is that there is a combination of policies that we should adopt, and this is usually the most effective. Okay. So what is the combination of policies? Okay, we want to have policies that will give us actual growth. So these are the demand side policies and short run supply side policies. But we also want potential growth through long run supply side policies. So can you see that this is the combination of policies that we are talking about? Okay, and at the same time, which policies do you choose in the combination? That is also important, and that would depend on the local characteristics of the economy. Okay, I think we have gone through this question before. Certain types of economy are more suited for certain policies. Okay, try to recall which policies are suited for which type of economies. Okay, Okay, so that is the end of the review of this question. For the next time practice, we will actually be doing the 2012 promo CSQ. Okay, that question can be found in your Ask and Learn portal. Please download and print that question. Okay, if you don't print that question, there's no way you can do a time practice for CSQ. Okay, so please help me by bringing that question. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much.